Okay, welcome back. We're going to now move on to the second part of this week's lecture. And what I've done is I've combined two objectives in this part. It just makes it more logical to talk about the broad and narrow view and the key arguments related to each of those as we go along, rather than talk about the broad view, talk about the narrow view, and then come back and talk about the arguments for and against. So, let's start by looking at the narrow view of economic corporate social responsibility. What I want to emphasize as we go through this is, even though I've said three key arguments relate to the narrow view, I'm actually going to introduce you to 5 arguments. I think your textbook talks about 5. I think that 2 of these actually fit as subsets of the other arguments, so that's why I've structured it in that way. So, the narrow view of corporate social responsibility is the firm exists to make profit, to maximize the profit for its shareholders. That's its primary, its only obligation. It's the only duty, is to act in a way that is in the public, is act in the way to protect the best interests of the shareholders. So it can do anything as long as it meets that goal. That's its fiduciary responsibility, as long as it stays within the rules of the game. And we've mentioned earlier that the rules of the game are the legal constraints that are placed on firms to operate in a particular society. And that argument means that it needs only to follow the letter of the law, as distinct from having any other level of ethical or philanthropic responsibility to broader society. It is to achieve its economic goals and follow the letter of the law. The arguments for the narrow view, there are 5 key arguments. The last 2, I think, are sort of subsets. The first is the invisible hand argument, the let the government do it argument, the business can't handle it argument, corporations that lack the expertise argument, which I think is actually almost a subset of the business can't handle it argument, and corporations will impose their own values on us. So let's work through these arguments and talk about how they fit together. Now, you will remember that the invisible hand of the market is something that Adam Smith, in your economics classes, you would have talked about Adam Smith. The invisible hand of the market means that competition in a market economy leads us to have the best outcomes. It serves the needs of the shareholders, the economic needs of the shareholders, the people that are taking the risk. People who work for the organisation have an economic interest and nothing beyond an economic interest of working in exchange for wages. And an efficient market economy means that benefits are spread, and therefore people get rewarded related to their individual effort. That's what society should be. So the argument goes that if you are following the invisible hand argument, that any corporate social responsibility activities beyond legal compliance to the rules of the game, beyond serving the economic needs of the owners and therefore meeting the economic responsibilities that you have to your suppliers and your workers, your customers to an extent, would undermine the very foundations of the free enterprise system. The sky would fall, dogs would marry cats. It would be the end of society as we know it. The counterpoint to that is that when Adam Smith developed this idea of the invisible hand, he was talking about markets and representation of small business people, of craftspeople, of farmers, of agrarians, and having a system of fair exchange. Modern corporations are not tiny markets. They have a whole range of different influences on society. They influence the way, what research happens at universities, what courses are focused on, because now we see governments being influenced to say universities should produce people with particular skills only to service the market. Just imagine if Oxford University had been created by the merchants in the Oxford market in the 1600s. Would we have a focus on medicine? Would we have a focus on science? Would we have a focus on how colonialism works? Would we have a focus on the arts? Probably not. Would we have a focus on health? So modern corporations bear little resemblance to the self-sufficient farmers and craftspeople that Adam Smith based his theory on. Modern corporations exert political and social power. And they influence the nature of society. They influence government behaviour. They influence the behaviour of others. And conversely, they are also pressured by public opinion and other outside influences to behave in a particular way. So the reason that Nike says it has a code of conduct in the way that it deals with its supply chain, ensuring that there will be safety, ensuring that there will be low cost, proper wages paid, ensuring there will be no child labour. Having these principles came about largely not because Nike felt that they didn't need to reduce the cost of the production. It came about, and they should pay people a living wage, it came about because of pressure by Western consumers and Western consumer groups following some scandals related to footwear and clothing manufacturing, of which Nike was one of the firms that was the victim of the scandal. Because firms have a history of racing to the bottom to get the lowest cost in their supply chain. So, they're different to the original firms that are little businesses that Adam Smith was talking about. They're subject to different political pressures and other pressures, and they exert their own political pressures. And finally, there is pretty clearly a positive correlation between corporate social responsible behaviour, or at least the appearance of corporate social responsible behaviour, and the financial success of businesses. Now, there's stronger evidence of corporate social responsible behaviour and financial success of businesses when you look at a longer term, a sustainability, organisational survivability, sustainability, not environmental sustainability, that the organisation exists and makes profits over the longer term than there is over the shorter term, because some firms behave in a way that is clearly not corporately social responsible, then they disappear and they rebirth. But in the longer term, corporate social responsibility behaviour leads to sustainable competitive advantage, supports sustainable competitive advantage and above average returns. The balance to that here too is that sometimes people exaggerate the pressures that firms feel from society. It's well documented that if we increase the price of brand name sneakers by $2, every person on the supply chain would make a living wage. So the people making the shoes, the people driving the trucks, the people running the boats, the people in the distribution, the people in the retail industry, all aspects of this, etc., would make a living wage if they were if each sneaker cost $2 more. So for $160 pair of sneakers, the ones I bought this week, if they made them $162, that means everyone in that supply chain would make a living wage. And a living wage is different in different countries because it's affected by purchasing power parity in different countries. But there doesn't seem to be a strong set of evidence that people are pursuing the willingness to pay $2 extra for everything to ensure that's happening. Now, we do see that, however, in the idea of fair trade coffee. People actively select fair trade coffee. In fact, almost every coffee producer is now fair trade coffee, because there was that level of pressure. Now, how many people are buying that coffee purely for that reason, and how many people are just buying the coffee and are happy that it's fair trade, and how many people don't care? Enough care for almost every coffee producer to be a fair trade producer. Now, of course, the fair trade coffee producers have used that to attack the tea producers, because the tea producers didn't have the original problem of exploitation. They had a different they had sort of a paternalistic structure related to their workers. But they're now replicating that type of theme as well. So, first issue, the invisible hand argument, case before, for the case against. Second issue, let the government do it. Corporations need to be profit orientated. They'll will profit while they're impoverishing the society. Therefore, you need strong government regulation to bring corporations under control. That may mean that there is ownership of particular types of corporations. And altruistically, most countries have a public health system, for example. And many of those public health system organisations operate as corporations with public ownership. While in America, if we have public health, if we expand public health, many people see that as socialism and immediately attribute that to the socialism we see in Venezuela. But also, the let the government do it argument is about corporations not being able to operate in a particular way because the government needs to set rules and regulations and standards, because we can't trust those corporations to behave in any way other than narrow self-interest. The problem with that argument, it's a blueprint for intrusive government. It's a blueprint for government having too much, and that's a pejorative term because what is too much? Blueprint for government having too much influence on the economy, too much influence on society, too much influence that means that the economy and society becomes inefficient, and it has a net negative effect on business, government and society. Secondly, you can't possibly regulate everything. Firms can quite easily come up with ways. If there's a law, firms will find a way to get around that law. And of course, businesses don't understand every potential practice. I was watching a video about the coronavirus small business subsidy in America this morning. And there's this chain of cheesecake stores. I'm not going to name the store in case I get sued, in New York. And they've structured themselves as 5 small businesses. And because they've structured themselves as 5 small businesses, they're receiving a loan, effectively an interest-free loan, that will become a grant that will total $5.5 million to operate. Now, this grant is intended to keep, to go to the workers who've lost their jobs because the restaurants have closed in the US and small businesses, to protect small businesses. So this $5 million is going to go to this company, and it's supposed to be there to pay the wages of people working. But in the grant, and if you do pay the wages, it moves from being a loan to a grant. But in that process, there is no requirement for when the wages. There's no time period set. So we have the CEO of this organisation arguing absolutely rationally that we're getting this $5.5 million, but that's about the salary for the next 2.5 months. It's about 10 weeks' salary for the staff that work. I'm still paying the private insurance for all my staff. Well, he's not. He's only paying for the salaried staff. He's not paying for the casual employees. But be that as it may, they're still paying for that. If they spend this $5.5 million, when they do reopen, they won't have money to reboot. And the purpose of this grant is to keep small businesses open so that they can bring back their staff afterwards. So they found a loophole, what I would perceive to be a loophole in the law, which means they're actually going to start paying those wages, and they're going to use it for the reasons they've set up a separate account. They're going to use it for reasons related to the account, but they're not going to use it for 10 weeks or whenever they reopen, which could be 10 weeks' time, it could be 12 weeks' time. Now, I don't think that was the intention of the government, but it may well have been. It may well have been quite open that the government knew, the legislature knew that something's happened, and that's why they left the loophole open. I don't know. But that's a rule and regulation. At the same time, this company mentioned that how successful the other part of their business, which is a separate entity, which is their direct-to-consumer cheesecake delivery, was working. So they've got a successful business in a corporation that's increasing its profitability, that's based in New Jersey, a different but adjacent state, that's delivering direct to consumers these cheesecakes and other products, and really through its grocery products, it's really grown really strongly, but at the same time, it's receiving the subsidy, not spending it for what arguably was the intention for it to be spent, which was to keep people connected with the companies by paying their wages during this period. Now, there are different approaches that different countries have taken. In the UK, 80% of wages bills are being paid by the government. In Australia, we've got a subsidy that is only for Australians and misses out a pile of casual workers who have not worked continuously for the past 12 months for the same employer, and misses out all people that are on a temporary visa or a student visa to have their wages subsidised, but is designed to be a direct payment to the organisation so that they can pay $1,500 worth of salary. Now, again, that direct payment is very good for the government to do and really is rescuing these companies. So you can see logically, and the intention is it goes to the workers and keeps them there. But at the same time, there is no requirement for the company. So it misses out a pile of people, firstly. But at the same time, there's no requirement for the company not to say to their workers, well, we want you to use all your sick leave and all your annual leave and all your carers leave while we pocket this subsidy. So they're not changing the obligation. The person is running down their leave because the company's closed, but they're not being paid the income. Now that is an example of where the government can only prescribe certain behaviour on broad issues, but cannot anticipate every specific moral challenge or every way that a firm may in fact get around it. And finally, the question is whether or not the government is a credible custodian. There are some political parties who seem to exist in government to make government smaller, to eliminate government. There are different perspectives on the role of government. There are some countries where the government is clearly corrupt or has a crony capitalism relationship with large business. So there's a whole range of reasons why having greater government involvement may not work or may have negative outcomes. But there's also the reason, well, can you really expect government to be able to know everything, to anticipate every moral issue that might arise? The third area that I want to talk about, is the can the business handle it argument. The can the business handle it argument goes like this. Businesses do not have the expertise to be able to behave in a corporate, socially responsible way. They lack the expertise. They're going to impose their materialistic values, and therefore they can't be trusted to behave in a corporate, social, responsible manner under the narrow view. So you can't expect them to do that. So why would you expect them to do that? The counterpoint argument to that is that many corporations have demonstrated that they can and do accept corporate social responsible behaviour for their immediate and wider communities. And secondly, you see whole racks of corporations claiming that they can deliver social services, education, transportation, healthcare more efficiently and effectively than government, in a way that benefits society. And in fact, a lot of the intellectual property protections that some firms seek is linked to the fact that they can do good for society if their profits are protected. So I don't think that the corporations can't handle it is a credible argument. Linked to that corporations can't handle it argument is the lack of expertise argument. That argument is corporate executives lack the moral and social expertise to make anything other than economic decisions. To give them non-economic decisions would place moral welfare in the hands of inept custodians. The balance to that is, however, that many corporations do in fact have the expertise, the talent and resources to tackle those problems, and claim that they do when they set up businesses to do just that. A final argument to talk about is that corporations will impose their values upon us. This argument in the narrow view says that if corporations stray from their pure economic matters, they'll impose value on society. Rather than acting as a moral actor, they will materialise society. Well, think of an example of that. We have Veolia, a French water company. It's also broader than just a water company. It's an infrastructure and operations company. It runs many of the garbage collection, for example, in Australia. In Melbourne, it used to run the trains. Veolia is this sort of corporate services company. In South Africa, it runs a water company. It runs the water company. South Africa is a little bit unique. No, not that unique. There are countries that have this as well, where there is in the Constitution a guarantee of a minimum water provision for all people in society. Water is seen as a right. Now, Veolia looks after the water distribution company in South Africa. Veolia is a company that is a for-profit entity and has this contracting. It must supply water. So what have they done? They've set up within the shanty towns, within these sort of communities that are poorly resourced, that are around the outside of countries and within of cities, and in some of the poor suburbs of cities, in the cities in South Africa as well. These slow dripper water fountains. These slow dripper water fountains take almost a full day to deliver the minimum amount of water. So, if you are a person living in one of these towns, one of these suburbs, one of these locations, your right to water is being fulfilled. You just have to stand by the tap with a bucket all day to get your minimum amount of water. Of course, if you pay for the water, it gets delivered much more quickly. They're basically applying an economic solution, materialising society. But it's not only there. You can find this in a number of other areas. If you want to get your credit statement from one of the big credit companies to see whether or not you are in fact have good credit reference, see what is on that statement that may be influencing your credit rating. You can get it by paying a fee. And the faster you want it, the bigger fee you have to pay. But you're legally required to be able to receive that. It's supposed to be free. So if you scroll right down to the bottom of the page, you find the bit that gives you it free, and it takes a week and a half or 14 days or something to get your credit statement. Because they're trying to sell you this materialistic, you will get it immediately if you spend $32. Something that's supposed to be available free. It is available free. They're complying with the law. They've just materialised the process. Now, so those arguments about how firms can monetarise things that are supposed to be things that they're complying with legally or supposed to be things that are moral affects us a little bit more, because yes, they can do that, but just so therefore we shouldn't have, in a narrow view, we shouldn't have it. But we already see corporations going outside their economic interests, exerting considerable discretionary power, whether it's through lobbying, whether it's through their code of conduct, whether it's through the way they behave. So they are already extending beyond this narrow economic view to influence aspects of society. So therefore, why would we not expect them to be able to do that in a corporate, social, responsible way? That brings us to the next area of focus, which is the broad view of corporate social responsibility. So the broad view of social responsibility for corporations, or corporate social responsibility, says that corporations are creation invented to serve human needs, and that business has obligations in addition to the pursuit of profit. Corporations have obligations to consider the interests of all groups on which they rely, or which they have an interaction with. There is a social contract that a business has with the society in which it operates. It needs to consider its consumers, it needs to consider its suppliers, it needs to consider government, it needs to consider the local community, it needs to consider the natural environment. It has this broader duty. And that is really the modern view of a firm, the modern view of the role of corporations in society. If you've given them this right to be like an individual, you need to expect that they behave in a corporate social responsible way. In this broad, and corporate social responsibility is broader than merely complying with the law or serving economic needs. Sorry about that, I just clicked the slide the wrong way. The last slide in this section, the last slide for the objective is, well, what does that mean? What does the broad view mean? Corporations have a duty to make profit, but that does not outweigh their duty to behave responsibly. There is an agency relationship between the managers of the organisation and the owners of the organisation, and the managers of the organisation do have a fiduciary responsibility to service the economic needs to make a profit for their organisation, but it's not absolute. You know, if it was absolute, let's ignore the law, let's just sell drugs. That's the way to make the most profit. Firms are so focused on the bottom line that they are willing to sacrifice their own values, and if they do focus in that way, they will not serve society well, given that they've been given this creation of being an individual within a society. As such, they should take the broad view of corporate social responsibility, a broader view of their role in society, a broader view to their stakeholder groups, not just to the shareholders. Okay, that's the end of this section. We're going to come back in a few minutes and talk about how you operationalize, how you institutionalize ethics and corporate social responsibility in organizations. And that's our objective 4.